Greetings, the movie for today is a horror film of American origin by the title of The Boy. After being employed as a nanny by a wealthy household, a woman named Greta Evans journeys to the United Kingdom. As soon as she arrives and discovers that the homeowner is absent, she removes her shoes and explores the vast mansion. Unexpectedly, she encounters Malcolm, a local delivery man who frequents the residence. Malcolm then extends an invitation to Greta for a tour. Shortly thereafter, an older woman named Mrs. Heelshire, who is the wife of the homeowner, arrives. Greta is questioned by Mrs. Heelshire about her shoes, which she had removed earlier. To Greta's surprise, the shoes are nowhere to be found. Mrs. Heelshire nonchalantly suggests that her son may be responsible for their disappearance. Greta is invited by Mrs. Heelshire to meet her husband, Mr. Heelshire, and also to be introduced to the boy she will be taking care of. However, much to her surprise, the child turns out to be a porcelain doll named Brahms. Initially, Greta laughs, assuming it's a joke, but the serious expressions on the faces of both Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire leave her bewildered. Greta is informed by Mrs. Heelshire that numerous nannies had applied for the job, but Brahms rejected them because of their lack of youth and beauty. The Heelshires instruct Greta on how to care for Brahms by giving her a set of rigid rules to adhere to, such as reading to Brahms in a loud and distinct voice, playing loud music for him, storing leftovers in the fridge, placing a mousetrap, and giving Brahms a goodnight kiss. After her experience in the house, Greta contacts her sister to share the details. The next day, Greta overhears an irate Mrs. Heelshire discovering that Brahms had made a mess of his room. Subsequently, Mr. Heelshire announces that they will be going on vacation, leaving Greta alone with Brahms. He also provides Greta with a schedule for the next few days. Once the Heelshires depart, Greta starts to disregard the rules and leaves Brahms by himself. Upon awakening in the middle of the night, Greta becomes aware of unfamiliar sounds and swiftly begins to search for their origin. While standing in front of a painting, a hand suddenly emerges from the wall, grasping her neck, but it transpires that this was just a nightmare. Afterward, Greta investigates Brahms' room and notices that he appears to be on the verge of tears. Upon further inspection, she discovers that the ceiling is leaking. Greta receives an abrupt call one night, but the person on the other end remains silent. The next day, Malcolm arrives to deliver groceries and Greta inquires about Brahms. Malcolm discloses that Brahms was formerly a living child and the sole offspring of Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire. Tragically, Brahms perished when their home caught fire and he was unable to escape. To cope with their loss, the family fashioned the doll as a means of solace. That night, Malcolm invites Greta out on a date, which she agrees to. While speaking with her sister on the phone, Greta notices Brahms watching her and quickly shuts the door. Despite this, she proceeds to prepare for the date, but to her surprise, she discovers that her hair has been cut, and her dress and necklace have vanished. In a panic, she searches for her belongings and is eventually led to the attic by a strange noise. As she climbs the ladder, the attic door abruptly closes behind her, trapping her inside. When Malcolm arrives to pick her up, Greta calls out for assistance, but he is unable to hear her cries for help and departs. After attempting to find an alternate escape route, Greta is startled by the sudden appearance of a large shadow in front of her, causing her to faint. The following morning, Greta regains consciousness and finds herself mysteriously released. She recounts the previous night's events to Malcolm and discovers that the ladder has the ability to open and close on its own. Greta inquired Malcolm about Brahms once more, and he responded that there are two speculations circulating about Brahms. According to some inhabitants of the town, they sympathize with him and recall him as a well-behaved boy. However, others allege that he was wicked. In the evening, Greta contacts her sister once more, who informs her that her abusive ex-partner, Cole, has been attempting to locate her. Greta has a strong dislike for Cole, as she had a miscarriage following his violent attack. After preparing for bed and brushing her teeth, Greta hears a peculiar sound from Brahms' room. Upon approaching the room, she notices Brahms' head is tilted and suddenly moves on its own. However, this proves to be nothing more than a nightmare. The following day, Greta visits Brahms' room and notices that he has altered his posture. He is now sitting with the timetable by his side, giving the impression that he expects Greta to comply with the schedule. Greta is taken aback by this and rushes back to her room to contact her sister. Just as she attempts to make the call, the phone begins to ring. Upon answering it, she hears a child's voice urging her to adhere to the rules. Soon after, a shadow emerges from under the door, accompanied by the voice of a child. Greta has come to the realization that the doll conceals a greater number of mysteries than she had initially presumed. To her astonishment, she discovers that the doll is moving. Afterward, she opens the door to find a platter of sandwiches that Brahms had kindly brought her, leaving Greta with conflicting emotions. Brahms doesn't intend to harm her, he just desires her company. Greta contacts Malcolm to relay the situation, but he dismisses her report. In a subsequent scene, Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire are shown composing a letter addressed to Brahms, in which they express their inability to tolerate his present state of being, and state that the girl is now under his care. Following the completion of this correspondence, both individuals load their jackets with rocks and take their own lives. It is only after this that Greta comes to understand that Brahms is merely the benevolent spirit of a young boy, in need of affection, and begins to treat him kindly and fulfill her obligations. The following day, Malcolm arrives with a missive from Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire. That evening, Malcolm invites Greta to go for a walk, but she declines due to feeling responsible for Brahms. Brahms surprises Greta by moving on his own the next day, which prompts her to invite Malcolm over to prove that the doll is alive. However, initially, they are unable to witness Brahms' movements as it only happens when they are not looking. Eventually, they manage to witness the doll's movements, and Malcolm comes to believe Greta's claims. Malcolm spends the night with Greta, enjoying each other's company until Brahms interrupts them, possibly out of jealousy. As they have a conversation in the kitchen, Malcolm realizes that Greta is becoming emotionally attached to him. To caution her, he reveals a more comprehensive account of Brahms' demise. In the morning, Cole, Greta's abusive ex-boyfriend, arrives at the mansion with the intention of coercing her to return home. To ensure Greta's safety, Malcolm stays nearby. Later that night, Greta implores the doll for assistance. Cole wakes up by a sensation of dripping blood on his forehead, and discovers a message written in blood telling him to depart. Assuming that Greta or Malcolm wrote it and becomes enraged. Greta attempts to clarify that Brahms used rat blood to create the message, but Cole refuses to believe her. Eventually, Malcolm joins them and tries to persuade Cole that the doll has more to it than meets the eye. After Cole becomes enraged and destroys the doll, the house experiences unsettling phenomena, such as flickering lights, shaking, and mysterious noises emanating from the walls. Cole attempts to locate the source of the disturbance, but his investigation is interrupted by a sudden explosion of the mirror. This event causes Cole to fall behind, and through the newly formed hole emerges a man who is revealed to be the grown-up Brahms, donning a porcelain mask identical to the one worn by the shattered doll. Brahms proceeds to attack and ultimately murder Cole. Malcolm and Greta, who are present, become frightened and flee the scene to seek safety. Brahms' chamber is stumbled upon by Greta and Malcolm, where they come across a doll fashioned from Greta's lost attire, hair, and accessories lying on Brahms' bed. It is discovered that Brahms had been monitoring Greta from that very room. In addition, Greta uncovers the farewell message left by the Heelshires, disclosing their plot of abandoning her as a partner for Brahms. Soon after, Brahms appears and incapacitates Malcolm, warning Greta that he would kill him if she departs. Despite this, Greta manages to flee the premises but later returns to rescue Malcolm. With the screwdriver hidden on her back pocket, Greta commands him to go to bed according to the rules. Brahms requested a good-night kiss, but when he inclined, she stabbed him. Brahms retaliated by trying to strangle her, but she drove the screwdriver deeper, causing him to collapse. Greta came to Malcolm's aid, and they fled from the house. The final scene of the movie shows Brahms reassembling fragments of the doll, which implies that he may still be alive. Based on the information provided, it can be inferred that Brahms did not actually die. Instead, he was a disturbed child who killed Emily Cribbs on his 8th birthday. In order to protect him from the consequences of his actions, his parents burned down their own house and pretended that he had died. They then concealed Brahms within the walls of their grand mansion. The suicide of Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire may have been influenced by their guilt over what had happened, as they realized that their love for their son could not outweigh their sense of responsibility for his actions. Throughout the film, there are various clues that build up to a significant revelation. At the start of the movie, Mrs. Heelshire informs Greta about the house rules, emphasizing Brahms' preference for loud music. This implies that as Brahms resides within the walls, any music or speech directed towards him should be loud enough to be heard through them. The Heelshires are very particular about maintaining a vermin-free house and stress the importance of keeping the mouse traps clean to prevent any mice from entering the walls. Additionally, it is apparent that all the uneaten food in the house is saved for Brahms, as Mr. Heelshire informs Greta. Mrs. Heelshire also mentions that Brahms is a shy individual who only moves when no one is present, indicating that the doll was not moving on its own but was being manipulated by the real Brahms who resides within the walls. If you enjoy this video, kindly consider subscribing for more contents, and turning on notification to stay updated. Your support is appreciated and leaving a like will be of great help. Thank you for taking the time to watch.